Hey everyone, Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd. Hope you're doing well. I have on Mr. Alexander Jones of the band Undeath, who has taken the time to come through here and give us some bangin' death metal recommendations. I specifically asked Alexander to drop by and give us 5 records that he thinks in the death metal genre are so underrated, and I felt pretty safe in asking this question because I don't know. I just got the sense by listening to Undeath's music that you don't really get death metal that good unless you have good taste in death metal. Like I feel like it's, I feel like your records are pretty well informed by the old school. So I think it's like, it's not really something that I think you could do so well if it was a genre that you were just like kind of taking casually. So I figured you had to know like some good ones. You had to have some good, like, picks. So, and I'm glad I asked because again, you did. We're heading over to the first one over here, which I have listed the Internal Suffering record.
Yes.
Awakening of the Rebel. This came out in 2006. Yes. These guys are from South America. Is that the case originally?
Dude, they're all over the place. So they started in, I want to say Colombia, and then all of the band, or at least like some of the members, moved to New York City, and based a band out of there for a while. And now I think they're actually in Spain. Mm-hmm. So I think technically, they started in South America, but they're, I guess, a Spanish band now. They're globe-trotting death metal. I don't know how to describe Internal Suffering and do them justice. I feel like they're such an off-the-wall band. To me, they harken most to a band like Defeated Sanity, where it's just chaos 100% of the time, but every now and then while you're listening to it, your ear will kind of pick out just one discernible riff out of the madness, and you're like, oh damn, that was a sick riff. So It's kind of like listening to white noise with cool riffs.
I mean, diving into it myself at first, it did sound to me a lot like a lot of records from the 2000s that were at that point in time pushing the boundaries of what brutal death metal had to offer and just bringing like exceptional tightness as well. But like the more I listened to it, what stuck out to me about it was just how fucking insane some of the guitar harmonies were. Like some of the harmonies that they come up with in these tracks, it's not just, this completely noisy onslaught a lot of the time, in my opinion, like, because some of the guitar layering is absolutely fucking nuts and even like a little bit classical at points as well. So it's like, for something that is so relentless and so hideous and so ugly, there are like these really cool melodic flashes that sometimes are happening so fast. If you're not paying attention to them, they can really like fly by you throughout the album as well.
Absolutely, man. I mean, that you nailed it. I think, one thing, not musically, but just one thing that you have to point out with this band in any discussion is that their album covers are like just fucking ridiculous. They look like old like Memphis hip hop covers.
I never thought of it that way, but I guess like, yeah,
the title is kind of like this, and then like it's amazing.
I want to move on to one of the next ones that you recommended over here on the list. I have the Morpheus Descends record, Ritual of Infinity, dropped in 1992. These guys are from New York. Why did you pick this record?
Because it's fucking badass, dude. I picked it because when you talk about like seminal New York death metal bands, I mean, obviously stuff like Suffocation, Internal Bleeding, stuff like that comes up all the time. Cannibal Corpse, obviously, but Morpheus Descends is one of those bands that I feel like belongs in that conversation. I think Ritual of Infinity, they're, as far as I'm aware, only full length. I think it's right up there in my mind with something like Pierce from Within, or any of the Internal Bleeding records. Like, it's just solid, groovy, riffy, fun, bouncy New York death metal. And, they're a band that's kind of like just perpetually underrated in my mind. And I would love to turn more people onto them.
What stuck out to me the most about this LP is not so much its sound, but just like when it came out, because like thinking of the earliest years of death metal in the late 80s and early 90s, and thinking of like releases at that time from early Cannibal Corpse stuff, which in comparison with this really just sounds like a heavier version of thrash metal, whereas this sounds like pretty ahead of its time for like 1992. Like this sounds like a much more like heavy, crushing, pummeling style of death metal that you wouldn't get until like maybe 4 or 5 years down the road. And with to your knowledge, because like I was only able to hear like the reissue version, has the mix always been this fucking like like
cacophonous?
Yeah, exactly. Like everything is just so thick and compressed and booming, like, whereas if you like compare it to like early Autopsy stuff, for example, like it's way thinner sonically. Like the original recordings are way thinner, not not nearly as bassy as this is. This thing is thick as fuck for a record from 1992.
Yeah, as far as I'm aware, it's always sounded like that. It's always kind of had that like chunky New York style. And what you said about like thrash metal and stuff, that's 100% true. I mean, you think about a band like Cannibal Corpse, they didn't really, I mean, in my estimation, start having like defining that Cannibal Corpse sound until Tomb of the Mutilated, like the third album. That's when they really start sounding like Cannibal Corpse. Like there's elements of that on Butchered at Birth, but Eaten Back to Life and Butcher, for the most part, I mean, when you listen to those riffs, they're kind of like, they're very much steeped in thrash metal. And what they're doing is just this kind of grimier, more chaotic, more disgusting thrash in a lot of ways. And then on Tomb, that sound coalesces in a very elemental way. But it's funny, like Morpheus Descends was already on that shit like years before. So it's amazing for that reason that a lot of people don't recognize that album as one of the like founding death metal records in a way, because they were making this kind of music before most bands were even like considering making it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, like when I first listened to how fucking thick this was, it almost hit me like a Bolt Thrower record, because like when it comes to that style of music, like when I think thick, like super heavy shit, like, my mind goes to bands like that. But like this was like right away, it was like, holy fucking shit, this thing is just like so bassy and so heavy.
Yeah. And they're still around. I don't think they have another record. I know they did like a 7-inch or an EP or something like that came out on Dark Descent, I want to say, a couple of years ago, maybe like 3, 4, 5 years ago, something like that. But it was just the same shit. It was not quite as revolutionary as it was when this record dropped, obviously, but because the sound's been around for a while now. But they're still, in my opinion, like some of the masters of this kind of style, and I'm kind of consistently amazed that more people don't hype them up as much as other bands.
No, I mean, I was talking to the person who linked us, and I said, I want undiscovered gems. And, you fucking brought one with this one for sure. Also with this next band who I've never heard of before, and I think was like my favorite of all the records that you recommended, the Intestine Baalism, if that's how
it's my favorite too.
Pronounce their name. This band's from Japan. They have a few albums out. This is one of them. An Anatomy of the Beast. This came out in 1997. Okay, so why did you pick this one?
You asked me this question. It's like, why did you pick this? And the gut reaction is always just because it's sick. And then I feel a need to expound upon it because I don't want to just leave you hanging.
Expound.
But there's just I mean, when you talk about like Japanese metal bands, especially Japanese death metal bands, a lot of the time there's always kind of this element of like unpredictability with them. Like you're not really sure what direction they're going to go in. Even bands that are more traditional, like a band like Coffins that does
Coffins hella traditional.
Yeah, like very meat and potatoes, death doom style. Even that band goes off in some directions on like every other record, or even like every other song that are kind of unexpected. But with a band like Intestine Baalism, I mean, there's like 50 incongruous riffs per song, but somehow it works. It's. I feel like a lot of bands really struggle to just have like one great riff in a song, and Intestine Baalism somehow manages to pack like, I would say on this album, at least 10 or 15 amazing riffs per song. And it's a remarkable feat. And the title track on this album, especially, I don't know what you're going to play, but the title track, like it opens with this riff that's just like galloping and super epic. Like it's almost bordering on like Amon Amarth territory in a lot of ways, but then it kind of segues into a very driving, just more traditional death metal style. They're just a wacky, fucking awesome band, and this record is great. This is definitely, I think, the best one. It's my personal favorite, at least, and I out of the ones that I sent you, it's by far my favorite.
When I first heard it myself, the thing that impressed me a little bit off the bat about it is that, like the first record we were talking about, for an album that came out in 1997, it does sound like really tight, clear, and punchy, almost like a death metal record I would expect to have come out in the 2000s, would sound. So in that respect, there was kind of like a crispness to it that, felt ahead of its time. But then as I dived even further into it, I was wowed by the fact that this thing is like so much more than a freaking death metal record. Like, you have the blast beats and the blackened vocals as well, and some of the tremolo guitars. And then it seems like the further you go into it, the more black metal influences you're hearing. On top of that, like, there are tons of tracks that are guided by just like straight classic sounding thrash metal riffs. Like, it's not even like super heavy in an experience sometimes. And as you were kind of saying, like, some of those like great riff ideas that come up in every track, like, I'll straight up say it, like, some of the riffs on this thing are fucking catchy. Like, this is the catchiest of all the records that you've recommended in this whole bunch. This is one of the catchiest death metal albums I've heard in a minute. Like, for a death metal record, this thing really kind of sticks in my head just in terms of like how crazy the riff voicings are.
Yeah, totally. And I think, and we'll get to this too with another record that I recommended, but I think catchiness in death metal is such an underrated aspect of the genre. I think people, when they're starting death metal bands or when they're listening to death metal, they tend to really place this emphasis on atmosphere and kind of like creating a vibe, which is great. That works for tons and tons of bands, but songwriting and actually crafting like just a great hook and a great chorus and even just a great series of riffs is like, you can go so many places with that. And a band like Intestine Baalism is just a testament to how you can create a truly memorable metal record by just like cramming as many ideas as possible into it. And somehow they manage to make it coherent and they make it cohesive. And they're just a really special band. And I want as many people to listen to them as possible.
You brought me this one from Finland, 2018, Skull Maggot, Sculled to Death.
Dude, that's what you want out of death metal. You want bands releasing albums called Sculled to Death. Like, say no more.
I know. Like, out of all the records that you recommended, like, in terms of not only the band, but the album cover and, song titles like Come Culprit, I was like, this is the most death metal album he's recommended here. And what's funny is, like, I typically like my death metal a little bit on the grimier side of things, but even this, like, it kind of pushed that threshold for me because I was like, this is almost too fucking filthy. Like,
well, they're from Finland, man. Finland is a scary place.
I mean, first off, I'll say before I even play any of it, like, the drums are completely fucking whacked. Like, one of the only drums I can make out in the mix is the snare, which sounds like a countertop. This is really like one of those death metal records where the draw and the beauty of it, as it were, is really from how hideous it all sounds. Like, they really seem to have put a lot of effort into making this mix, making the sound of this as hideous and as unapproachable as they possibly could.
Oh, it's a nightmare to listen to, like, audio wise by far. But even that being said, you'll be listening to this album and you'll be just marveling at how terrible it sounds. But then the riffs are undeniable.
Right.
This is a band that knows its way around the riff.
That's the thing. Like, at first, and it's not a diss. It's almost like, because again, in death metal, hideousness is the art form. I was just like in awe of, like, how do they get it to sound so shitty? Like, I can't even imagine what is the first thing that they would do to get it to sound this horrendous. But the more I listened to it, the more I was like, wait, some of these riffs like kind of kick ass.
Yeah.
Like, it's, for a record that sounds this disgusting, it does seem like they put a lot of thought and a lot of effort into how detailed the bass and guitar work are.
Definitely, and it really harkens back to like early Autopsy in a lot of ways,
Mm.
early Cannibal. I don't really hear so much like Morbid Angel or like the more like evil, like nefarious death metal
No,
bands in there so much.
definitely not like Morbid Angel or Possession or whatever. Definitely not.
No,
No.
it's very like B horror movie, just like slasher film death metal, but like in the best possible way.
I will say, my first listen to all of these records was actually not even on these earbuds or on headphones or anything. I was able to pick up more detail with the earbuds in, so
Yeah,
it was a little bit more approachable as opposed to it being on speakers.
they're definitely one of like the rare bands where I feel like the preferred listening format is old cassette tape.
Right. Yeah. I mean, this that's what a lot of people. And I think a lot of death metal has kind of been like, where some of the magic has been lost, which I think is also the case for genres like shoegaze again, because I feel like when it comes to styles like that, you really have to appreciate like what was the format that those styles of music existed on and how that may have impacted sort of like how people were hearing that stuff. Even stuff is, such as, hearing certain songs played over radio and the kind of compression that you get over the FM band and the AM band with certain genres and styles of music. But this type of shit was just like made to be on a nice, warm, fuzzy, worn out cassette tape for sure.
Yeah, and that's definitely true. And I think like a lot of times with death metal bands, when they lean into the more macabre, like horror, silly aspect of it, there's a desire to kind of go too far with it and to make everybody aware that you're like, hey, we're just having fun here. This is goofy. Like, look, we like horror movies, we like slasher films. Like, isn't that interesting? But that's why I love a band like Skull Maggot, because you get the sense while listening to it that they take it seriously and
Right.
they know that what they're making is ridiculous and goofy, but there's like craftsmanship to it. There's a lot of like Italian hand going on there, and I love them for it. I hope they keep doing it for a long time.
No, I mean, there is something that I appreciate about newer bands that are still kind of carrying the torch for this stuff, because you have to approach it with a certain level of self-awareness at this point, so many years down the road, that like much
Mm.
older and younger bands who are just like didn't know what the fuck any of this shit was going to be 10, 20 years down the road, like couldn't have possibly had, you know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. And I think death metal's been around for long enough that people are familiar enough with the genre on a large enough scale that nobody really thinks you're a serial killer. Like nobody really thinks you have a crawl space full of bodies. You're just like a gamer who plays guitar, like, and that's fine. Those are my people, and I want those people to keep making sick metal for a long time because they tend to be the best at it.
Right. Is there anything that in your mind is kind of like shifted in the genre at large, artistically or like ideologically, as I guess like what many of people have sort of seen as like the shock value of the style, like when maybe Cannibal Corpse was at their peak, sort of not having the shock that maybe it used to at one point.
Um, that's a really good question. I think death metal has had so much exposure now, and it's been around for so long that it just means so many different things to so many different people.
Mm.
And I think when you're starting, or when a genre of music, especially something as kind of for a while as insular as death metal was, it can only really mean a couple of things because there's only a couple of people making it.
Mm.
But now death metal's been around for, I don't know, 30, 40 years at this point. I guess like 30, 35. And enough people from enough different walks of life have gravitated to it and kind of like glommed onto it that they're inserting their own life experiences and their own meaning to it. So that's kind of the beauty of it. And in a way, not to get too like nouveau spiritual here, but like that's kind of just the beauty of music, is that can whatever you want to extrapolate from it is in some way true because it's your experience.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the great things about the genre is that, for something that, as you say, was so insular at one time, and, a lot of early death metal bands had a hard time getting label deals, getting gigs at clubs, and so on and so forth, which is why, that whole tape underground for it existed in the first place. It's a genre that, despite it being so harsh and despite it being so unwelcoming, seems to artistically have only thrived the more exposure that it gets. And, with, I guess, sort of like the supposed shock value of it mostly, being a thing of the past, and that no longer being a driver to continue creating it. I feel like the bands of today who are still doing their thing with it. I mean, what's really kind of pushing that creativity at the end of the day is again, just the creativity of it and just sort of the artistry of it, as opposed to like whatever kind of socially it sort of means in the grander scheme of things. You can just make the music just for the music.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I was actually just having this conversation with somebody else, and we were talking about like, just why death metal has like persisted over the years and why it's still around. And I think one thing that's kind of driven the genre forward, especially over the last like 5-10 years, is that the original death metal bands, like the first crop of influential, I guess, like primarily American bands, but also like the European bands, they were drawing influence and listening to a ton of like thrash metal. And that was their North Star. They were just trying to take something like thrash metal and, make it more extreme. I don't really know how else to describe it, but
no, I mean, that's exactly it.
Right. And now, you have death metal bands that are influenced by death metal. So there's kind of this, it's the genre is folding in on itself in a way where now you're taking influence not from something entirely different, but something that exists in your wheelhouse already. And as a result, all the bands that are coming out, for the most part, are really exciting, and they're doing really cool and interesting things while still paying homage to like the greats.
All right, the last record and band that you brought in here is Quo Vadis. I hope I'm saying that correctly.
I don't speak Latin. Right. I think it's Quo Vadis. I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that.
Defiant Imagination is the record. This dropped. They're from Canada. Dropped in 2004. Why did you pick this record? Other than the fact that it's sick.
This is a new one for me. I really wasn't that familiar with this band for before last year, honestly. Our bass player Tommy, he turned me on to this one. We were just on tour last year, and he played it in the band at one point because we were listening to something that had Steve DiGiorgio in it, the bass player. I think it was like Severed Survival or just something that he was on. And he was like, yo, you should check out this Quo Vadis record. And, if you're a fan of Steve DiGiorgio's bass playing, and I was kind of really captivated by it. I don't typically lean towards the proggier side of death metal too much. I mean, I have lots of like love and respect for bands that do that, but for me, like I'm largely like a meat and potatoes death metal guy. But this record, I think it's got hooks, it's got riffs, it's got really interesting ideas. I think it's obviously incredibly musically literate, because Steve is just I call him Steve like I know the guy. Like Steve DiGiorgio is one of the greatest metal bass players who's ever lived. Like his fills and his playing on this thing is just out of this world. I think it's like really the standout bit of this whole album is just listening to the bass. And it's just killer. It's just a killer record.
While I'm sort of like you in a respect, I don't sort of lean toward a lot of the proggier stuff in the death metal genre. There obviously are exceptions when bands can find ways to kind of blend that with the gruesome stuff, like in the case of Gorguts, groups like that, for example. But as a bassist myself, instantly the bass lines on this thing hit me track after track after track. I was like, holy shit, the bass is absolutely nuts and mixed well and really stands out. Another thing that stuck out to me about this record, especially on the intro track, was like the drum, I don't know what you would say, like the triggers, the programming are absolutely fucking insane. Like, to the point where, again, it does become like a little bit of a turn off at points because it just sounds so stiff and static in a way. But like the more you listen to it, you do kind of get into the vibe of it. Again, like not exactly a taste for me personally. Like I usually like the drums a little looser and chunkier on a lot of death metal records, but it sort of fits with the technical status quo that they're sitting in.
Yeah, totally. And like I said, this is a very new band to me as well. So I'm really excited to kind of like delve a little bit deeper into their discography and see, what they're all about, because this record left a very large and it impressed me. I really enjoyed it. And it's funny, when you guys are listening to these tracks, I can't hear what's going on, so I've just been drawing little pictures of skulls.
That's
very death metal.
That's a good way to fill the time. Well, I mean, look, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate like what you've done here in terms of these recommendations by like covering different eras and bringing different styles as well, because a lot of people who aren't necessarily like initiated to the genre don't really understand, like, you do have your basic meat and potatoes stuff that's really noisy, it's chaotic, it's hectic. Then on top of that, you have your different genre blends, be it with like blackened stuff, this, that, the other thing. Then you have your more progressive records that have a lot more musicality and harmony and melody to them. So, you really covered like with, again, these very underrated, underappreciated records, none of which I knew about before you recommended any of them.
Oh, very cool.
You covered a lot of bases. You covered, I think the more major bases anyway. So, I think you provide a little bit of an education here on top of it.
Cool, man. Yeah, I spent a lot of time thinking about what I was going to recommend, and if it was up to me, well, I guess it was up to me, but if I hadn't put any thought into it, I probably would have just recommended Autopsy, Severed Survival 5 times and called it a day. So I really wanted to do this justice.
All right, remind us before you head out, like the next Undeath record. We've played some of it during New Music Friday. People really reacted to it positively. When's the entire record coming out? Remind everyone of the title and again the release date and everything.
Cool. Yeah, we got a new album coming out. It's called "It's Time to Rise from the Grave." It comes out on April 22nd on Prosthetic Records. It's available everywhere. You can pre-order the vinyl, the CD, the cassette, all that good stuff right now. All the stuff's available at shop.undeathmetal.com. But honestly, if you just go on any of our social media pages, you'll find all the requisite links that you need. We just announced a tour today, actually, so this lined up perfectly. We're going out with Dying Fetus and Frozen Soul, Chelsea Grin and Body Snatcher. In pretty much the entire month of May into June. And I think that starts in late April. So that'll be a good time. And yeah, we're going to be doing a lot more touring this year beyond that. And, just stoked for everybody to hear the record and excited to see what people think.
Fucking awesome. We'll link everybody to all that social stuff down below, the tour stuff and everything on YouTube. And, again, just check out Undeath. Their, last record gave that a very positive review. One of my favorite records of that year. You guys should be well aware of that. If not, please look it up so you can be even more excited for the upcoming album in April. And Alexander, thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me, man. Maybe it's not cool to say, but this was kind of surreal for me, man. I've been watching your stuff since high school, so it's been an honor to come on for real.
It's high school. How much older am I than you?
Let's not talk about it.
Holy shit. Okay. All right. Well, I appreciate you.
Probably not that much older, honestly.
Yeah. I appreciate you coming through. Long time high school viewer.